So welcome to our affiliated New Thought Network speaker series, the affiliated New Thought Network, where we're uniting the New Thought movement through the conscious evolution of our members, something that we'll be talking a lot about this morning. I'm Dr. Carol Lawson, and I'm here and very excited to be talking to our special guest. Let me introduce our administrator, Reverend Jerry Troyer, Reverend Dr. Jerry Troyer, to call us together and do an opening prayer.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome. Invite you to just relax where you are. Take a deep breath, get comfortable for a moment. Releasing thoughts of what happened earlier today, thoughts of later today or tomorrow, so we can be fully present for a little while in the lusciousness of this moment. And as we do, we allow ourselves to be reminded of our oneness with the God presence with one another and with all of life. And we come together in gratitude this morning for the opportunity to be open at the top, as Ernest Holmes said, to talk about oneness, to talk about our relationship with others and with all of life. We are so grateful for the opportunity to have Dr. Barbara with us today. So I wrap our time together in gratitude, love, and light, and together we say, and so it is.
So it is. So we are absolutely delighted to have Dr. Barbara Fields this morning. I'll read you a little bit of her bio for those of you that might not be aware of this beautifulness here. She is the executive director of the Association for Global New Thought. She's a co-founder and project director of the Gandhi King Seasons for Peace and Nonviolence. And we're going to talk about that for sure, because beautiful coincidence, today is the day that Season for Peace and Nonviolence starts. So it's wonderful. She's worked and organized the Synthesis Dialogues with 1, 2, and 3 with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the omni-local initiatives for the Harvard-based Abraham Walk Initiative in the Middle East. Formerly, she served as the program director for the first Parliament of World's Religions in Chicago. She's also a delegate to UNESCO Seminar on Religion and Peace in Granada, Spain, the director and producer of the Awakened World Conference series, which many of us from here in New Jersey went to, several of those. She's been the, including the Gandhi King Peace Train, Agents Interfaith Forum in Rome and Florence, the Awakened World International Film Festival in Santa Barbara, and the Symposium on Engaged Spirituality in San Diego. So she's been a very busy being for many years. She has an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters, Religious Science International's first Peace Award, the Peace Museum's Community Peacemaker Award in the area of diplomacy, the Gandhi King Akita Award from Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel. And she's a contributing author, I love this, to the Community of Religions, 200 Visionaries, and Women's Spirituality and Transformative Leadership, Where Grace Meets Power. This is exactly who Dr. Barbara Fields is, Where Grace Meets Power. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you. No wonder I'm so tired.
Yeah, see, now that you really take a look at it all.
No, I haven't actually looked at that for a little while, but thank you for the introduction. I'm just so pleased to be here, and I'm so pleased that AGNT and ANTN are forming a renewed alliance at this point in our histories, because I think we need us now more than ever, don't you?
Yes, I do. I think we need not only each other, but I think the world needs some spiritually guided activism, as we're going to talk about today. You know, I thought this morning, though, as I went over this beautiful bio, and I really wanted to ask you, of all those awards and things, what was the most meaningful for you, or the most surprising, or something that, you know, means a lot to you?
You know, for one thing, all those were unexpected. You know, I'm kind of a,
Beautiful.
if you know about me, well, for one thing, I like to be the person who's driving behind the screen like the Wizard of Oz.
Mhm.
And so whenever,
And you are, and you are.
well, you know, some of my colleagues are, as all of you know and actually are some of the most experienced presenters and speakers that I know. And so that's not my talent. So why would I want to be in front when all that talent was available? But I do have to say that even though all the awards were sort of a surprise, when I was in Chicago and I received the Community Peacemaker Award in the area of diplomacy, which in retrospect makes sense, you know, because that's my philosophy at the core of nonviolence is, like the Dalai Lama said, my religion is simple, my religion is kindness. So if you begin with kindness, then you're looking to be respectful and show courtesy to all parties, because Martin Luther King said you have to be sure that you're taking issue with the problem and not the person. So when I received that award and it was in my own community, I think that's what struck closest to home. But thank you for asking. That's an interesting
Beautiful.
question.
Beautiful, Barbara. Yeah, it gives people a nice little insight into you, I thought, as well. But I would love to at least start out, if we can, with the Season for Peace and Nonviolence, since tell us a little bit about your co-convening that, and since it's such a special day here.
Well, this is actually, it's the beginning of the 23rd annual Season for Nonviolence, because we started this in 1998. I had made friends with Dr. Arun Gandhi at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago, and I think that's something that we'll talk about a little bit today too.
Yes, I'd like
there was a barbecue in one of our board members at the Parliament up in their backyard after the Parliament was over, and I was sitting down next to Arun Gandhi at the picnic table, and we had worked together, we had made some friends, and I had just come off this sort of tremendously demanding conference convening, because I was thrown into the deep end and I had no idea what I was doing, and it turned out to be a tremendous success. But Arun said, you know, in a couple of years, my grandfather's 50th memorial anniversary is coming up, and I would like to do something that was more than just a conference to commemorate that. And, you know, we sort of just noodled it around a little bit, and then we realized that that was the 50th, so we realized in the same year, Martin Luther King Jr.'s memorial anniversary was April 4th, his 30th anniversary. So that was like a season, the early spring season. So I said, you know, why have a conference or a one-day, you know, commemoration? Why don't we have a whole season for nonviolence? And he says, okay, great, you're gonna do it.
And it was born.
Yeah, and it was born. But you know, this is what I think that we spoke about this in our preparatory call, Carol, but when I first met AGNT, I actually issued them a challenge. Yeah, I didn't even know about New Thought up until that time, honestly. And unfortunately, it's because New Thought only became recognized as a world religious tradition officially by the Parliament and other such organizations in 2015, which when you think of it is, you know, we're what, 200 years old formally or close to that?
Yes. Yeah, it's kind of amazing.
It's amazing, but it's because, as we like to say, we're such a well-kept secret. Well, we're too well-kept a secret, in my estimation. So at that time, so I pushed, you know, the Parliament people over the years to say, what gives? You know, we don't want to choose other when we register, and we can't call ourselves Christian. Not, we can because it's a basis of our belief system, but it doesn't really give full credit to our belief system. So, okay, so I was talking about the Season for Nonviolence and I digressed, didn't I? Okay, so when I met AGNT, which wasn't AGNT yet, it was Michael Beckwith, Roger Teal, Howard Caesar, Mary Morrissey, Barbara Marx Hubbard, you know, Michael Beckwith, I think I said. It was just these amazing people, and I had no history. And they said, well, we want you to be our executive director. We did a world scan, you know, or whatever. I think that was Barbara Marx Hubbard.
And you're the one.
Right, right. And I'll tell you more about that later. But, you know, so then I think they just thought I was going to say, oh, really? That's great. And I said, well, I'll do that if you do something for me. And so they said, well, what would that be? And I said, if you will consider that our first official program, our charter program, would be the Gandhi King Season for Nonviolence. If you can get your head around that, when that's not typically part of the New Thought mission, because that was the beginning of spiritually guided social activism. If you can find room in your mission for that kind of work, then I'll work for you. You know, so Roger still said, let's go for it. It was really great. Yeah.
Beautiful. And it's come so far. I see June on the call is part of the lead at our center and the things that we do, but you've got programs and things all over the world. And it's
actually, you know, one of the reasons that this program became successful sort of beyond our anticipation, which is what sort of taught me what New Thought was all about, because
things just unfold.
You know, because I had all these powerful ministers saying, well, of course, and here's me like pushing the cart up the hill, right? So, and I remember in our first paragraph of promotional material that we sent out into the New Thought world in 1998 was a campaign that will feature up to a dozen US cities who are working in concert, you know, in order to celebrate nonviolence where they live. And we ended up that year with, I think we had almost 300 cities the first year.
Wow.
And within 10 years, we had 900 plus cities in 67 countries.
Beautiful.
And it was one of those things that it was a God job, and it was an idea that wanted to come into the world with or without our help. And that's generally how I say yes to projects. Is I go into my own deep space, and I try to discern if a calling that I feel is coming from my genuine source. I ask the question, is this the energy that wants to come in now with or without my help? And if the answer is it's coming in anyway,
You might as well.
I'm saying, I'm at your service. I will be on board. And, you know, so far that's actually worked pretty well, because it's taught me how to be discerning and to say no, which is not my strong point.
Mm-hmm.
Because every good idea is worth a listen, right? But,
Yes.
you know, sometimes they're just not an ordained idea. You know, it's not an idea whose time is now. And there's a greater intelligence that's determining those kinds of judgments beyond what I could say. And we all know this, you know, this is our basic teaching. So.
This is our basic teaching, that allowing life to flow through. But how beautiful. I remember that first convening at the United Nations, and scads of people and lots of students from area schools and trying to get in and move around and stuff, because I'm in southern New Jersey. So it was close enough for me to be able to come to New York. It was beautiful.
Oh, it was wonderful. And in those beginning years, God bless you, because you were one of our poster children. You know, you just came on board and said, why not? Let's do this. And I remember how helpful you were, and I will be forever grateful.
Well, it's a beautiful thing, and I think we're listening to the same voice. So,
That helps.
Whatever you do, that's right. So, tell them a little bit about the resources available. I was looking on the AGNT website, and there's so many things that any of us in our communities might wanting to get involved in this season for peace and nonviolence could use.
Yeah, well, I think I was thinking about maybe screen sharing that, but I think I'll do that after we show this short video that I brought today. But I think one of the reasons that Season for Nonviolence, more than anything, in and of itself, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, we know that the vision and mission and the work of these men and the import that it has for so many other leaders of nonviolence that aren't named necessarily in the title. But the other aspect of this project that inspires me to this day is not the content, but the process and what it taught me and what it taught our network, what it certainly taught Association for Global New Thought in its beginning days. And that is, we have the power to do great big things together. And the question, what is global, turns out to be answered by the phrase, global is local everywhere at once. And so
I love that.
Isn't that nice?
I love that.
We came up, well, what else would it be? So we came up with this expression, omni-local. So Season for Nonviolence in its process was an experiment or a laboratory in omni-local spiritually guided social activism. And AGNT for the first many, many years, you know, I was at my desk sometimes 16 hours a day.
Yeah, I bet you were.
Creating and looking for and vetting material that could be distributed for free on our website. And in 1998, this technology was not as sophisticated and the tools were not as easy to use for users in those days. So if we found that if we made a big pool, a big menu of materials for teaching nonviolence, how to practice nonviolence in your schools, your communities, your churches, what did it have to do with interfaith dialogue, PSAs and media materials that were ready-made. All you had to do was plug in your local information, pre-written press releases, same deal, pre-distributed artwork, so you wouldn't have to start from scratch. Because I realized that one of the reasons that people who really want to get involved and do good, and their heart's there and their energy is there, the resources are there, but to ask that in a short period of time, 64-day period, they create everything they need in order to run that project from scratch. That's an impossible task. But if we created the pool and everyone was free to use it, modify it, edit, and I think what we learned is that people took the material and they altered it to make it their own. Because my direction to the leadership in all these cities was, hey guys, you know, this is a co-leadership opportunity. I have provided what I provided on behalf of AGNT, but you are the only one who understands what are the unique needs and resources in your own community. You know, I can't possibly know that from where I sit. So you need to interpret this, own it, and take leadership. And then people started sending back to me material that they had edited and altered. And then next year I would put that back up. And so we grew this huge resource.
This networking thing. Yeah.
Networking.
Beautiful.
But it was quantified and distributable in a way that made it what I call panarchy, instead of anarchy, right?
So
it was
that everybody was able to take and what they wanted and what they could use and do it. Yes, we did that.
right. I know you did. Look what she did to my text. She edited the hell out of it.
Oh, well. I'm thinking, a March for Peace is different if you're on the East Coast and the West Coast in January, early February. So even that little environmental thing, well, it could be a blizzard here. You need to take into account a place to stop for, hot chocolate and tea or something that you might not need to in, San Diego or Santa Barbara or someplace. So
No, that's absolutely
just a little
true.
tiny little thing, but yes.
But
So-
the needs of a very rural, small town, just because of their demographics, their education and nonviolence to the kids in their community is no less important than somebody in the middle of New York City helping us create a program at the UN with the whole city school system, right?
Right.
So, this is, to me, this is a hyper-democratic principle. And if a spiritual community can't make that manifest, then we're definitely looking in the wrong direction. So as much as anything, Season for Nonviolence has been a laboratory or a training ground to show us the process by which it is possible to achieve this kind of unified social action. When we say, I'm just one person, what kind of a difference could I make? Well, one person times thousands of people with the same vision, working from the same pool of resources in the same period of time, that really achieved quite a lot. And they say that mimicry is the, what do you call it, the most
Sincerest form of flattery, or
And so when we started seeing all these projects rise up, now there's literally, to me, that means that we really hit our mark, because the process was repeated because it was a workable process that wanted to be utilized.
and that goes back to your original thing about this was an idea who wanted to be expressed now.
Absolutely. Don't you love it when it works that way?
I do indeed. Well, I know you brought something to show us. Is this your initial thing is about all of AGNT, and you want to set it up or explain a little, or?
I would like to share with you the video slideshow that I put together recently, because the Leadership Council was in Denver at Roger Teal's church right after he retired. And we presented an award with him because he had served AGNT for over 20 years. Because there were so many people after 20 years who really didn't know, they had heard about AGNT, but they didn't really know what we were about. A couple of generations later, or a generation later. So I'm going to show this video. It's not very long, maybe about 5 minutes. It kind of just sort of chronicles quickly through some of our history. So as long as that seems interesting to people, then I can stop talking for a while. Is that okay?
Is that okay? We got any yeses out there?
Okay, thumbs up. I'm going to
Thumbs up.
do it. And I hope I do it right.
Unity World Headquarters, Unity Worldwide Ministries, Agape International Spiritual Center. The leadership of these New Thought organizations form the Association for Global New Thought. This is a brief visual presentation of our work and purpose. AGNT's Awakened World Conferences changed the face of New Thought gatherings. They brought together the most revered names in the consciousness movement, as well as introducing us to a whole new family of world-class colleagues in every field. Awakened World 2012 was an expedition into spiritual diplomacy. Here, AGNT gathered top faith leaders from the world's religions, along with scientists, educators, and other experts to work with grassroots activists from the New Thought community. For the past 20 years, AGNT's signature program in spiritual activism, the Gandhi King Season for Nonviolence, has made a name for itself in New Thought centers worldwide, attracting new organizations aligned with our mission of nonviolent social engagement. AGNT partnered with Harvard University in the early formation of the Abraham Path Initiative in the Middle East. Local New Thought groups walked their own pilgrimages from church to mosque to synagogue, symbolically uniting the three families of the patriarch Abraham. On 3 separate occasions, AGNT was invited to spend a week with His Holiness the Dalai Lama of Tibet. We brought with us the most agile hearts and minds on the planet to explore the deeper meaning of oneness, interdependence, and synthesis among the world's people and the social institutions that animate our societies. Guidance of Executive Director Dr. Barbara Fields, who was Program Director for the first modern Parliament of Religions Centennial celebration in Chicago, AGNT organized programs by New Thought leaders for the next 5 parliaments. In 2010, New Thought was historically added to the official list of the world's great religious traditions. AGNT was invited with other faith leaders to attend UNESCO's seminar on religion and peace in Granada, Spain. Changing the tone of its conferences, AGNT created the first Awakened World International Film Festival in Santa Barbara, California. Films address the themes of spirit, society, and self. We invited New Thought activists and champions of social change to a symposium on engaged spirituality. This led to a year-long online series to further explore what lies ahead. now, this month, we launch our brand new curriculum, Spiritually Guided Social Uplift Ministries. We hope you're inspired to learn more and join us. Centers for Spiritual Living.
Okay.
Wonderful, Barbara. Beautiful. And now you know why you were tired and why it's important that you ask that question. Is this an idea that wants to express itself? So with that kind of help, you're able to do it.
Thanks, Carol.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for letting me take that little journey too. I always feel, you know, these days how people are feeling is whatever I do enough to make a difference? You know, I mean, am I alone, or I get demoralized because of all the input coming in from all these crazy sources, and no matter how affirmative I try to keep my consciousness, I mean, I feel very vulnerable to those forces. And sometimes, you know, you just have a bad day and you're like, no matter what I do, will it actually make a difference? So I think that it's important for us to celebrate those accomplishments together. And I also think that one of the most important things that I believe AGNT and ANTN have to do together is to take up again the mantleship for leading more of a cooperation or collaboration in the New Thought movement itself. You know, we've been singing that tune for many years, but not all New Thought organizations, although they think it's a good idea for us to collaborate as organizations in a more unified way when we're presenting ourselves to the world, which doesn't understand all of our different denominations
Anyway, right?
definitions, and to, you know, religious science has recently tried to solve that problem, but unity is still too, I mean, it's, if there's that much complexity, then when we're trying to present ourselves on a world stage, no wonder it's confusing. And so it's a very good idea, but when it comes right down to it, the organizations just haven't been ready to be more collaborative in that way. And some months ago when I first met Allie and her husband, they came to Santa Barbara and we had a wonderful lunch together.
I'll just say that's Allie Benjamin, who's the president of ANTN right now.
Yeah, and thanks, Allie. And I want to acknowledge you because that conversation inspired me to say, you know, I've been kind of beating my head against this wall about let's get New Thought to collaborate within its own family a little better. And I had the feeling like the more I heard about ANTN's recent activities, I thought, you know, this could be a real collaboration in that leadership to try to reconvene that idea, because just because we weren't ready before doesn't mean we're not ready now. And I think that it's one of the most important things that we could be focusing on right now is making our own New Thought organizations strong and thriving and vital, but also realizing that we have to pay attention to the whole picture in some intentional way.
And I think that that's why this spiritually guided activism is so intriguing and exciting for me, because you are starting from that inner place, And I think that it's as we all evolve and encourage this kind of conscious evolution that is definitely expressing itself and going to regardless, why we're in a really beautiful field to be able to do that, I think.
And it's not us, then who? You know, isn't that Jean Houston's famous expression? If not us, then who? If not now, then when? No.
We are the times. These are the times, we are the people.
One of my, you know, of course, dear friends, because, and mentors, and I feel like she's family over the years, was our dear friend Barbara Marx Hubbard.
Mm-hmm.
And I I actually met her through the Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1993. And she's the reason that I became affiliated with the AGNT ministers in the first place. So
you want to share a little bit about that? Because I did ask you, I remember at one point, well, what brought you to all of this? You know, what's in your early life or your own background that brought you to here?
yeah, I was thinking about that question as I was, thinking about, Barbara just popped into my head all of a sudden. So I thought, oh, maybe she's around. As it turns out, where I live in Santa Barbara, she actually was my exact next door neighbor for 6 years. So like almost to the end of her life. We'd been friends for years, but I was in Chicago, she was in San Francisco. In 2000, she moved to Santa Barbara. In 2002, I moved back from Chicago to Santa Barbara, and we were living about 3 miles from each other. And then she moved again, and we were living about a mile from each other. And then the house next door to us kept coming up for rent, but she wasn't ready to make a change. And the third time it did, I said, "You're moving here," because well, she was approaching what, late 70s, early 80s at that point. And I just said, what if one of us needs to borrow a cup of sugar? And honestly, I felt with her family and her daughters, scattered around the country and elsewhere. And she had a wonderful community of support in Santa Barbara, but in the day-to-day picture, she didn't have somebody close by where, if anything was going to happen and she needed immediate assistance. I mean, as it turned out, she rescued me many more times than I rescued her. But when I was program director for the Parliament of Religions, the first time, it was 1991. It was 1992 when I started there, and I remember receiving a letter from Barbara Marx Hubbard, and I had never heard of her before. I was living in a much more academic environment, interreligious dialogue at a more formal level. I didn't really know very much about the New Thought consciousness community per se.
That was my early experience with Barbara too. I didn't know too much, but I went and was folding flyers for her campaign for vice president for peace.
Wow.
But go ahead with your story. I just want to add the.
No, that's amazing. She influenced so many people's lives. So I get this letter. I mean, I often slept on the floor of my office in this big corporate building in downtown Chicago, because to take a train back home to the suburbs where I lived and then be back at work the next morning, because I would work till like all hours of the night and just say, well, but why bother to go home? I'm just going to sleep on the floor. But one of those nights, I opened a letter from Barbara Marx Hubbard, which said basically, why haven't I been invited to speak at the Parliament of the World?
Oh, that's perfect. I can hear that voice.
I mean, she was perfectly cordial about it, but
yes,
definitely
but it's
wanted
still,
an answer. So I think I ended up calling her up because it was a longer explanation. You know what? We didn't even have email at that time to plan the first Parliament. We were doing it all by correspondence, telephone, and fax. And it was 1 week of 750 programs at the Palmer House Hilton Hotel in Chicago, and pulled together on a wing and a prayer or whatever within less than
a lady who was sleeping on the floor.
Oh my God, that was such an experience. But when I called her up and I said, I hope you're not offended. I mean, I figured that everybody who said they were important, and I better respect that, right? And I said, it just doesn't work that way. It's more or less that there's a kind of a protocol or a hierarchy of leadership within the world's religious traditions, and that we're approached by their secretariats, sometimes by, their disciples or their congregations, to bring forth a religious leader's desire to participate. So we're not really trying to figure it all out on our own. We're expecting religious leadership, clergy, representatives to come and identify themselves and teach us about their own hierarchy, if such a hierarchy exists, so that we can, provide a most faithful representation of who really is the spokesperson for your world tradition. And I said, so if you want to come to the Parliament, send us a proposal, and we'll consider, and so and so and so and so. So,
and have your tradition send its disciples to talk to me about it.
well, see, the thing is that she didn't know what her tradition was.
I know. She's a woman for peace. And
well, but then she started telling me about conscious evolution. Mm-hmm. And she said, I don't want to make a proposal. I want to come to the Parliament and find out from all of those religious leaders, most of whom were men, by the way, because it still remains the most patriarchal institution on the face of the planet. So that was another whole story. But she wanted to hear from them about what they thought was their contribution to the future of religion itself. And I'm like looking at all these conservative board members and all these, extremely orthodox thinking people that I'm working with. And I'm like, how am I going to phrase that question?
So it sounds nice and encouraging and inspiring.
But as it turns out, she ended up showing up in the Chicago office. And she just said, let's just have a meeting and talk about possibilities. And we ended up actually forming a second aspect of that first Parliament that was called Parliament of the People. And it sort of juxtaposed what was a very clear hierarchical Parliament program, because we had, the top second in command at the Vatican, and we had the Dalai Lama, and we had Louis Farrakhan, and that first year at the Parliament was just amazing in terms of who showed up, which is sometimes what happens with an original idea that sort of becomes a franchise over the years. But in that first amount of energy, we had elders from the four directions and Aboriginal leaders. It was mind-blowing what happened in Chicago. In fact, the Parliament of Religions was meant to be a centennial celebration of the first World Congress of Religions that had taken place at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. It wasn't supposed to be a continuing experience, but it was so successful that the board was like, hey, we're on to something here. Let's keep it going, which is the beginning of the end in my estimation. So we formed something called the Parliament of the People, where we created a democratic kind of parliament where anyone's voice could be heard, as well as listening to the speeches from the podium on the big stage. And it ended up being one of the most successful aspects of that parliament, because it kind of democratized the feeling of ownership that people who felt they were just there to listen, they realized that what's really needed are their voices, that we're all in this together, and we don't defer to leadership to be the only people who are working for a better world. We have to participate, and we have to be recognized as participants. So that was very interesting. And so Barbara kind of had her place, inspiring people and commandeering that whole situation. And it really was the beginning of a wonderful friendship. And then not too long later, she called me from California, and I was still in Chicago. So it was about 2 a.m. my time. And because it was 2 a.m., I picked up the phone because I thought maybe something was wrong.
Yeah.
And so it's Barbara Mark Hubbard, who I hadn't actually talked to in about a year. You know, I mean, like when the event was over, and she said, Barbara Fields, I'm here with the biggest New Thought voices, and we just did a world scan for our new executive director, and it's you, and you're on speakerphone. I'm like, I said, you know, it's 2 a.m. Anyway, that's how I got connected to these band of merry pranksters, was through Barbara Hubbard. And then one thing led to another, but it was just a wonderful opportunity for me to figure out, after all the frustration of working with the bureaucracy that I encountered at the Parliament, then to meet these New Thought ministers and start to understand what you all are about, you know. I mean, it just brought my heart back up to the surface, because it had been such a struggle dealing with the bureaucracy of religion and the patriarchy of religion and the protocol. And I was feeling like, where's the spirituality in all of this? But then I met the New Thought ministers, and I'm thinking, this actually feels like home to me. You know, this was more like it. And we just became, you know, a real partnership at that point. And I really have to thank Barbara for that opportunity. One thing led to another.
Well, thank you, Barbara. Both Barbaras.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful work. Thank you. Let me say, if somebody does have a question, I know that other people are muted, but if you'll write it on the chat, just at the bottom of the page, there's a chat. You will be happy to answer your questions. I see Allie, and I know that one of the things that she was very interested in was the SUM program, the Spiritually Guided Socially Uplift Ministries. Would you talk a little bit about that for us too?
Yeah. Jerry, it's fine if I screen share again, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. Let me see if I can, I'd like to pull, this I would like to pull up for you on the screen. Spiritually Guided Social Uplift Ministries, which the acronym is SUM. Let's see. Can you see this? Can you see my webpage on the screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, after about 2 years of Season for Nonviolence, let me see if I can go back to. We were thinking that our general field had done such a good job in learning about the principles of nonviolence, which was a bridge that was walking New Thought people from, you know, this is church and spirituality, and it's separate from
The world.
activism in the community. Or I'm not an activist, I just come here because I want spiritual rejuvenation or whatever, you know. But it's typical of sort of the separation between church and state. And 20 years ago, New Thought was very much in that camp. I don't think it is anymore, but it was at the time. And so it really took, I would say, a couple of decades for people to realize, what did their spirituality have to do with their work in the world and their responsibilities for work in the world. But after that point, I realized that many of our communities were getting to be quite sophisticated in terms of social issues. And so the thing that AGNT was responding to was the fact that it was time to kind of move from activism light, if you will, to where no one could object or there couldn't be any controversy, because no one generally objected to the idea of educating for nonviolence. And Gandhi and King, almost everyone could kind of buy into that at some level without it creating any conflict or controversy, of which we seem to be very frightened. But then when we started getting into the real issues where there is a divisive debate, and it can become political. We found a lot of people thinking like, I don't know if I'm ready to go there. So AGNT created a program, took about 18 months to write this curriculum. And it's a 9-module curriculum. Each one takes, well, basically it's only 3 2-hour sessions, but each module runs over the course of about a 2-month period. And are you able to read the list of the 9 modules? Are they big enough on the screen?
Yes. Gun responsibility and healing violence.
Right. You know, so AGNT, we picked out 9 issues that we felt were, you know, the most pressing for us to be involved in. And the curriculum is unique because it's possible for us to go almost anywhere on the internet. Let me see if I can get back into our resource page. Here it is. Okay. And find like living room conversations, which is a way of getting a community conversation started about an issue like immigration or gun control or healthcare or something. But our people who were trying to do those programs kept leaving and saying, it doesn't take our spirituality or the principles we believe in into consideration. So how is that spiritual activism? So we wrote an independent curriculum where the foundation is established in terms of what are the underlying principles, the causes, the real effect that we know in spirit are to be true about this issue. It just doesn't come from a vacuum. It comes from consciousness writ large. And so we spend quite a bit of time in the curriculum asking people to discuss their own spirituality in relation to the issue. And then at that point, we move on to provide videos and fact sheets and a series of questions for dialogue that get into the real nitty-gritty of the issue itself, with the hope that congregations will then begin to understand what it has to do with spirituality, understand how to talk about the issues where they didn't really know where to begin before, and possibly what kind of a vision did their congregation or their group hold in this area in order for them to move out into the community, just like they did with Season for Nonviolence, and see if they could align with other like interests in the community, and see if they could actually contribute to the solution. So we provide these toolkits to ministers or anyone that they appoint as their representatives, where there's videos and scripts for each session and promotional materials. Basically, like with Season, a one-stop shopping, so people don't have to reinvent each module of the program.
It's the same way you did for the Season for Nonviolence, and there's things available.
Exactly.
I just wanted to be sure that, you know, that people knew. I don't know whether we answered questions you had, Allie, but.
Barbara, could you put the 7 modules back up, the list of them? I've got one of my office managers looking at it, and I'd love her to see it if that's a possibility, that sheet that shows the 7.
Sure, let's see. How do I go out here? I think I'm going to stop sharing here for a second.
And you can go to, Angelo, it's on the
website.
AGNT website.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So it'll show you under resources, and it'll say,
Okay.
I think it says some, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I can show it to you here. I was just trying to figure out how to get out of that screen.
While Barbara's talking, I want you to know that Barbara Marks Hubbard was very influential in the creation of Emerson Theological Institute.
Yes, I know that she was. Yeah, she was a real voice in this area.
Well, the conscious evolution was her whole thing. Was
yeah,
that's what she came to teach.
Yeah, we present her with the first doctorate of consciousness studies, and our liaison person was Dr. John Minkler. Do you remember John Minkler, Barbara? Have you ever?
Yeah, I definitely remember that name.
Yeah, John Minker and Stella and I made several trips to Santa Barbara to be with Barbara as well. We love her.
Yeah, she was a great one.
You just see it.
I just want to show you these areas of, so climate truth, gender and sexual identity and expression, gun responsibility, healing racism and ethnic fairness, healthcare rights and access, homelessness and poverty, immigration and refugee rights, religious diversity and inclusion, women's issues. So those are the 9 areas that we're looking at. And we have the curriculum, and it's not complicated, it's not long. It's just a really good first immersion for the people who, I mean, some of you might have had this experience with your churches or your centers. People who they want to jump in, and once again, they're not exactly sure where to start or what it has to do with their spiritual life. And this is precisely designed to be that first step. It doesn't go all the way. We're not quite ready to do that yet, but we do have provisions and resources for people who just get it and they want to move fast. And so we can facilitate that as well.
I'm
Is this
reminded
program
of,
available to the public, or is it just for AGNT members?
No, it's available to anyone who wants to take leadership. And the way that we structured it is there's no charge for the curriculum, but we would ask you to become a member in order to access the curriculum. It's $50 for individuals. Because like we learned from Season for Nonviolence that if we don't know who you are, where you are, and what you're doing, we can't track it, and we can't reflect it back out to the network, and we can't get anywhere. So instead of okay, use our program and go out into space and we'll never hear from you again. So actually that's been working pretty well. We've got about 100 groups doing this program now.
beautiful.
At some level.
Wonderful. Okay.
So I don't see any questions. So I think everybody's just enjoying listening to you and your story. As we kind of near the end of our time, we talked in, I don't know, one of those conversations about the future direction of New Thought. And I loved some of the things that Barbara and I were talking about, our kind of long time intermittent connections with one another, and discovered we're a mutual admiration society, which you guys could probably see. And she says, hey, that's a cool idea. What if the USA could aspire to become a collective mutual admiration society, respecting diversity and difference on all levels? And I love just putting forward some of these ideas that we can, all open to. But you talked about setting a spiritual intention for moving forward in our vision that we could all kind of hold.
You know, I know sometimes that sounds a little bold and audacious to state such a vision, but I think that's what we need now. So when we realize, and I've heard certainly some very astute political pundits say, we have to create a lot of remedies for what's going on in our own country right now, the leadership not being the least of them. And it might take some time to do healing and to reestablish what the kind of idealism and patriotism that I certainly grew up with. I was born in the early 50s, and my idea for many years and to this day of United States of America is a fairly ideal vision. It stands for good stuff, it's got integrity, and it's got responsibility and leadership and some gravitas to it. And it was founded by our own forefathers on extremely spiritual principles. And I don't know if any of you have read Jacob Needleman's book about the founding days and the founding personnel of America, but it shows exactly how close to our spiritual principles their thinking really was. And I'm just thinking that, again, if not us, then who? If there was a return to that very fundamental vision of kindness and integrity and honesty, you know, I could go on, we're all thinking the same thing. But what a legacy, you know, what a national legacy to leave in the world, than to say, we're going to stop, reboot, and we're going to go back to basics here. You know, what are the most fundamental, decent human principles our country could represent as a model for the rest of the world, which of course we once were. So to me, it seems like New Thought has something to say about that work.
I think it also isn't just about this country, but it's about humanity. If we're talking about a conscious evolution that's going on everywhere. And you talked about it, many people are talking about this feeling that we really are on a threshold. You know, Gene Houston's been saying for 20 years about now the time where the people is like, well, okay, but now really. And I think there's an immense possibility because none of us know. When you're on a leading edge and you don't know what's unfolding. And I think that that's why it's so vitally important that we have that spiritually centered first, that we do, as you said very early on, go back to source and say, is this what wants to come through? Is this?
Absolutely. You know, I know we're drawing to a close now, and one of my favorite stories, because I was actually there, was being at Morehouse College, Martin Luther King International Chapel, and the Dean Lawrence Carter, has become one of our good friends. And he does amazing things in Atlanta. He brought the city officials and mayors from around the region to the chapel to listen to some of the New Thought ministers speak, because he gets New Thought and he wanted it to be out there. So of course, Michael Beckwith was up at the podium, and he was kind of, in those days, he was more careful. He had notes about his speech. Now he just lets it rip, you know, he doesn't even bother with the note taking. But he was giving this very good speech to this illustrious people in the audience. And he was trying to explain what it meant to take that leap over the edge into new territory. And I could see him getting more and more frustrated trying to find the language to a secular audience to express this. And finally, he just like puts down the cards and he looks at the audience and he says, people, if it's really new, it's going to be a surprise. And then the whole group just said, oh, okay, we get it now. So as you say, we don't know what's ahead, but it's not for us to say, but we have a lot to say about the intention of what that will look like, even if we don't know exactly what form it will take to unfold. But that's our part of the co-creation, but it's only 50% of the equation. And then we're going to have to see what, you know, divine intelligence has in mind. And to me, that's the meaning of co-creation, and why Barbara Marx Hubbard really got that right.
And why your life and your contribution to New Thought and the Planet is so beautiful.
Oh,
So thank you, Barbara, very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Barbara, so much.
Well, thank you all for being here. It was lovely to talk to you all today.
I know Jerry wants to say just a minute of maybe about our conference and other things. So we'll give him
we're way late, so just really quickly, now is a great time to go on our website, newthought.org, and register for the conference September 28th to October 2nd at Unity Village in outside of Kansas City. Going to be a wonderful time, so look forward to seeing all of you there.
Paul Zelig is going to be our keynote speaker, and some other glorious people that will be unfolding. Mitch Horowitz, right. Other things. So Barbara Field, thank you very much. Let's just, Jerry, would you like to pray us out as we just give thanks to?
Oh,
which
okay.
is surprise, or not?
Sure. So we just staying in this consciousness of oneness, in this consciousness of lusciousness and education and inspiration. We give great thanks for the opportunity to be together today. We give great thanks for the love and the wisdom and the vision of the wonderful people that have created AGNT and their amazing work in the world. We give great thanks for the opportunity to move forward with our work in the world, knowing that each of us individually and collectively do make a difference in every moment and every day. We give great thanks for our time together today, and together we say, and so it is.
So it is.
Thank you, Barbara, so very much for being with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks,
Bye,
Barbara. Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.